Andrew, I want to start off with this chart talking about taking a look at the divergence between how Chinese equities have performed, or underperformed, I should say, across global equities. There in the white, there you've got MSCI China there. Clearly that split the gap, right, between how equities, particularly in the US, have performed compared to China. Is there anything that's going to help in terms of, you know, the fundamental growth story for China, if you put aside trade wars, is actually still pretty positive?
Well, we think on a cyclical basis, actually, that the second half of this year already we're, you know, a couple months into Q3, but that from here through to the end of the year, growth's going to be pretty weak. We really think that the fall off in Chinese equities is related more to the domestic economy and domestic sentiment than it is to the trade war, really, and the fact that the Chinese leadership, they've come with economic support measures since late July, but they haven't been very strong. They've all been quite targeted and are not really, in our view, expected to turn around the growth picture in these next 2 to 3 quarters. So we don't really see much of an upside on Chinese equities or growth into Q1 2019.
But the thing is, if you're looking at China from a longer term perspective, a managed slowdown is what we had been expecting, right? You don't really want, for the sake of systemic risk, the government to return to the old ways of stimulating the economy.
Yeah, that's right. A gradual slowdown would be best for them. I think it actually is pretty remarkable how they have been fairly reticent to do any kind of big stimulus package in response to this slowdown and in response to the uncertainty in the trade war. And in fact, if we didn't have the uncertainty of the trade war, even the measures that have been rolled out so far might not be as aggressive as they are. But you know, there are some concerns for the domestic economy. Particularly, leadership is concerned about the extremely slow growth of infrastructure investment. We actually saw the first ever negative growth in infrastructure investment year over year in July, and the sort of intended infrastructure investment numbers are also showing that local governments don't intend to spend a lot over these next 6 months. And so that's led policymakers to really try to ramp up local government bond issuance so that they can start to juice a little bit of that investment. So yeah, of course, a managed slowdown would be the best, but they need to make sure that as you know, the deleveraging campaign moves forward, the financial de-risking campaign moves forward, that things don't seize up too quickly.
Andrew, this is David in Hong Kong. You're based in Beijing. Does it feel like things are slowing down?
Well, there's certainly a mood of uncertainty on the political side here due to the trade war. There's more and more commentary, both among just general social commentary, but also on the web, about this idea of a consumption downgrade as well. And I think that's really what has a lot of people concerned about this cycle, is that, you know, to date, it's just been the credit tightening and infrastructure spending that's really been driving the slowdown. But if we're starting to see that filter into consumption, then the economy is really going to have a problem in terms of, or leadership's going to have a problem in terms of putting a floor under growth, because consumption over the past few down cycles has been the one thing that's really continued moving forward, or continued growing at a relatively robust pace. But in terms of what the conversation is on the street when it comes to how the economy is doing, this notion of consumption downgrading is starting to become a concern.
And why do you think consumption is seeing a downgrade? I mean, is it a function of jobs? Is it a function of wages? Uncertainty on the capex side, and we're not getting that much hiring? Because that's a very important point to make.
Yeah, I think it's jobs and wages in particular. Wages are not growing very fast, and people are starting to feel that. Inflation creeping up very slowly, but I think the biggest piece of this, especially in the big cities, is just how gangbusters real estate has been growing. Everyone is obsessed with having to save in order to buy a more and more expensive apartment. And your average middle-class Chinese person is increasingly being priced out of the market, and that's why leadership is also trying to focus very much on that affordability of housing issue. And so your average Chinese person has to consume less so that they can save to buy their house. And this all kind of filters together. It's another reason why they've been reluctant to do heavy stimulus, is because they know that heavy monetary stimulus especially filters in to the real estate market immediately and would only serve to further pump up prices. So they're kind of stuck here in this place where they can't really juice the economy, because they know that that will only lead to unintended consequences, namely a further run up in housing prices, giving them further affordability issues.
Andrew, there's always been, grassroots grievances, right? That people that haven't felt like the great China growth story has necessarily filtered through to living standards and affordability of housing. Is that filtering up to satisfaction or dissatisfaction with the leadership? We've been reading that there's been increasing pressure on Xi over the past summer.
Well, I think these are actually two separate issues. There has been some rethink again of the trade war strategy in Beijing, and that was, sort of talked about in the context of some pressure on Xi Jinping. But a lot of that just seemed to, frankly, be rumor over the summer as things were quiet. The leadership was going into Beidaihe. Coming out of Beidaihe, it's pretty clear that Xi is still large and in charge, and he's sticking to his program and is unfettered in terms of moving forward that program. And actually out there, outside of the cities, among rural Chinese and poorer Chinese, there's a lot of support still for both the party and Xi himself. So I think that's partly because there's been a lot of investment in those areas. That's another big pillar of policy right now, is the rural revitalization strategy. And so at the grassroots level, it actually seems like there's a lot of support for the leadership. The dissatisfaction seems to be a little bit more in the sort of intelligentsia, the Beijing, Shanghai chattering classes.
Andrew, we're out of time. We've got to leave it there. I don't mean this in a personal way, but that was a very depressing conversation. But I guess that is perhaps the mood there. Andrew Pogue, thank you so much for coming on the program, Tribune China partner and co-founder. All right, Yvonne's here to hopefully perk us up with the first word news. Yvonne.
Yeah, a little less depressing news. China showing some unexpected resilience in the face of the trade war. PMI data from the factory floor indicates output held up in August, coming in at 51.3, beating expectations of 51. Now, non-manufacturing PMI also topped forecast, rising to 54.2 this month from 54 in July. The results somewhat contradict early indicators, which had suggested a further slowdown. President Trump is threatening to pull the U.S. out of the World Trade Organization if America doesn't get better treatment. Speaking to Bloomberg at the White House, he said, quote, "If they don't shape up, I'll withdraw." Last month, the president said the U.S. is at a big disadvantage and has been treated very badly by the organization. A pullout would severely damage the trading system that Washington helped to build.
I would say the WTO was the single worst trade deal ever made. And if they don't shape up, I would withdraw from the WTO.
The EU says it's prepared to lift tariffs on all industrial products, including cars, if the U.S. does the same. The two sides are expected to hold talks in the coming weeks, building on a loose agreement last month to work towards zero levies. Trade Commissioner Cecilia Malmström denied